This is Arise, the Honest Man's podcast. Real men arising to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. My name is Karuna Avatar. With me is Jai Jagannath. We have Madhva Anderson, as well as Abhay Charan. Jai Jagannath, what are we getting into today?
I forget how you titled it, but we're going to talk about vows and spirituality. Every cult's got them, and we're a proper cult also, Hare Krishna cult. And we have our standards of application, which we, as initiated members of the cult, make vows to follow these standards of application. At least in the beginning Hare Krishna movement, they came to be affectionately known as the four regulative principles. I don't know if they're exactly affectionately referred to as that, but that's my little joke. So there's the four regulative principles: no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, and no illicit sex. So just personally and vicariously, my subjectivity informs me that there's really only one regulative principle. And what I've observed over the years, not only personally, but vicariously, is that people in general struggle to adhere to their vows. We make these vows at the time of initiation into the Hare Krishna cult, and people have a hard time living up to the standard, to the letter of the law at least. And there's a silence about it in the community. So it's kind of like understood, generally speaking, that people may not be following. It's not like you go around asking people like, hey, bro, do you follow the four regulative principles strictly? Not like we were like walking around asking people and sizing them up. But there's a sort of general sort of silence around it. So I thought we might open that can of worms today and discuss it. What do you think? Is it a good can of worms to open and discuss? So let me, as far as the history of this and the Hare Krishna movement, the history of it is that the first initiates into the Hare Krishna cult, I may be telling this story not precisely, so flesh it out in areas where I mess up. But the first initiates in the Hare Krishna cult.
1 second. I have to make an embarrassing, I have to tell you, basically, I set myself up on my laptop, and that wasn't working, so I'm on my phone. And I need to run and grab my phone charger. So I'm going to be right back. You just continue doing your thing. It was perfect. I'm going to be right back.
We're just going to pause and wait for you the whole time. We're just going to sit here silent until you're back, Madhva.
So as the history goes, the first initiates into the cult, they actually made no vows of surrender or things that they're going to apply. Only after the initiation, they came up to the founder Acharya of the Hare Krishna movement in the West, Srila Prabhupada, and they asked him, like, are we supposed to be following some things? Like, it occurred to them that, you know, if you're an initiated person in a particular tradition, you might have to follow some standards of things. And Prabhupada, as I remember, was very relieved, you know, thinking like, oh my God, I didn't think you guys would ever ask. So he was very relieved to hear that they'd ask. And then he wrote like a little letter of sorts that was put on a message board. And there it was mentioned these four regulative principles. And these four regulative principles, as we come to learn later on, are the counter opposites of the principles of dharma that allow for flourishing human existence. So they're not necessarily devotional in their own right, but they allow for flourishing human existence. And if you're flourishing as a human, it makes it a lot easier, well, in theory at least, it makes it a lot easier to apply the principles of bhakti. So you have anyway, not going into the details of that, the four regulative principles are the counter opposites of the principles of dharma that allow for flourishing human existence. So Prabhupada writes his letter saying you follow these four regs and you chant 16 rounds minimum a day. Basically, there's more to the letter. That's all I can remember. And so it became the standard at the time of initiation that initiates into the Hare Krishna cult would make this vow that they would follow the four regulative principles and they would chant a minimum of however many rounds, 16 rounds for the Hare Krishna movement every single day. Now, historically, even during Prabhupada's time and up until today, it has been seen that initiates have a very hard time strictly applying that standard, particularly when it comes to the fourth regulative principle, the illicit sex one, but also even when it comes to like intoxication, because I don't know about you, but 2020 has been heavy, and you get in a very low place, and when you're in a low place, you could do some things. You know, I'm very lucky that I didn't have that sort of some scar before I joined the movement. But I was just telling friends the other day, if I was like smoking weed and stuff before I was a devotee, I would definitely be doing that now in my low states. Like, it's very tempting and attractive. Anyway, so initiates have a hard time following these principles, and there's a silence around it. Like, no one really talks about it, the struggles with it. So I want to kind of unpack this. This is my first question to the group. When we look at the philosophy of Bhaktivedanta, by Bhaktivedanta, I don't mean Srila Prabhupada. I mean Vedanta philosophy where the Siddhanta is Bhakti. That's what I mean by Bhaktivedanta here. When we look at the philosophy of Bhaktivedanta, philosophically speaking, it doesn't seem necessarily prudent that an initiate would make a vow to follow these four regulative principles to the end of his life from the time of initiation, unless he's like 75. Then I can see that making more sense. But you know, you're like a young guy and you're making a vow to follow these four regulative principles to the end of your life. It doesn't seem like, from a philosophical perspective, that it's prudent or judicious. And so I want to unpack this subject matter starting there. Maybe there's another angle. I just want to use this as the kickoff angle. Like, looking at it philosophically, as per your understanding of Bhaktivedanta philosophy, do you think it prudent to make this particular vow? If so, why? If not, why not? That's my kickoff. And I got my own thoughts also, but since I've already ran my mouth for too long, let me pass over the baton.
I'm going to
my
put a
question
buy on
clear?
the spot. Yeah, it's clear. I'm going to put a buy on the spot.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, all of the guys here were part of a men's Bhagavatam Sangha. So we're all kind of become very close over this 2020 year through the Sangha, and we're all in love with the Bai. So we always ask him to speak and put him on the spot at the last minute. So
don't say that.
You'll get a little bit of that rasa here.
You're setting me up for a hard fall. That's what you're doing.
No.
I guess, yeah, what I'll say is that I think it's proven in our, at least Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, I think more broadly in the Vaishnava tradition, that a disciple at the time of initiation will receive some instructions from their guru. Depending on the particular guru and the particular disciple, those instructions may vary, but broadly speaking, they're kind of prescriptions and restrictions, right? It's some combination of those two things. It's things to do and things not to do. And in general, I'd say historically, as far as I'm educated and can tell on the subject, those would tend to be relatively customized to the disciple and to the guru. And so there is a precedent for an initiate taking vows that are, again, a combination of prescriptions and restrictions at the time of initiation into, a certain spiritual lineage, in our case, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So that as a practice within our lineage, I think is supported by the history and is supported by Shastra. And so as a categorical practice, that seems to be very well supported and to make a lot of sense also practically in the life of a disciple who is through the act of initiation kind of at least symbolically handing over their own independence into the hands of the spiritual master. In terms of how much is actually handed over and how much that is able to be sustained, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. But at the very least, that's the principle of becoming a disciple, means to come under the shishya, to take shashan, to take the discipline of the guru. I think the question of whether the particular set of regulations that are now the standard in ISKCON, what are the considerations of pros and cons around that being the kind of universal standard for the society, and has there been something lost by the gurus, by not empowering the guru, so to speak, with discretion to give specific instructions to a specific disciple about which rules and regulations that disciple should follow for their own benefit? I think that's an interesting question. But I think just to start it off, categorically, the disciple taking a particular vows given by the spiritual master for the, at least the transcendental benefit of the disciple, but also in many cases for the kind of the conventional benefit of the disciple, that is well established. And I think that is a necessary component of our process.
Nice. I'm just going to reflect back what I heard. So basically, in terms of the application of surrender, the disciple is giving his life over to the guru. So the guru gives a set of prescriptions and restrictions to be applied. And that's universally accepted from Shastric edicts. So that part is clear. Now, as far as you use this word, which is something I'm going to come to later, customized, you're like looking at the disciple and then you're seeing like, okay, X, Y, and Z needs to be applied and not, WRS or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I like to come back to that idea later. So, okay. So anyway, Shastrically speaking, this is a well-established idea. Okay, cool. Madhura, Karuna, how you understand the philosophy and your understanding of this question?
I was just going to do that to you. Well, I do think that if we, okay, I'm just going to speak from my own very subjective personal experience and my own personal resolve for taking the vows that I have, and why I felt that to be something very necessary for me to do, is because, as Jai Jagannath pointed out in the beginning, that we're going to go through so many ups and downs in this lifetime. And the fact of the matter is that the ups and downs happen on the level of the mind. They happen on the level of thinking and feeling, which is always going to be taking us this way and that way. But one sign of true intelligence, I once heard, is that a truly intelligent man commits himself to practices and to pursuits that he values ultimately. Mm-hmm. So we need to make certain commitments in our life in order to transcend the whims of thoughts and feelings that are always going to be throwing us this way and that. And so I got to a point in my own spiritual life where I realized that if I do not completely give myself over to this practice of sadhana bhakti, and if I do not make lifetime commitments, then I'm certainly going to get myself in trouble. And that has actually just proven to be have been such a valuable step this year. I took initiation in February, right before all of this, COVID chaos hit us. And essentially for the since March, I have been in a circumstance where I've been very isolated and where I've been really struggling on so many levels. And if I hadn't made those commitments in the beginning of this year, man, I would have taken all kinds of really interesting detours. Probably, maybe I would, my resolve would have been strong, but just the fact that I made that commitment, it's really, really carried me through. And it's very clear to me that it was, divinely arranged that that this would happen for me at this particular time. Because I could also say that I sure as hell wasn't ready, if I'm going to speak according to my conditioned nature and according to the all of the wild impulses that constantly come up within me on a daily basis. Are you ever truly ready? No. Are you ever truly ready to commit yourself and bind yourself to another person in this life in holy matrimony? Like to literally like chain yourself to someone else? No. But you do it because you value the principle. So that's what I'll say.
Okay, nice. Mata, what you got?
Yeah. Well, I start my little piece by saying I think I'm the only one amongst the four of us who hasn't made any vows. And that's a lie. So I just share one thing with you.
You grew up in the movement, right?
That,
you grew up as a Hare Krishna.
Yeah. So I'm second. My parents are devotees. I grew up as a Hare Krishna. So you know, I have a devotional name because my parents gave it to me and all of that stuff. But I haven't taken initiation, and probably partially because of the way I was raised in Krishna consciousness. I approach it as a very, I mean, you know, my parents would tell me that your relationship with your guru is more important than your relationship with your wife. You know, and it's kind of like, it might sound strange to put it like that. But if you think about it from the spiritual context, that the guru is the person who lifts us out of this material world and connects us back to Krishna, it makes sense from that perspective. But I just say I have made one vow. I made a vow a couple of years ago now, and I'm probably going to break this freaking vow too. But I made a vow which I'll never make because I tried to make them back in the day, and I would just break all of them. I literally have never been able to maintain a single vow. I don't think in my life. I'm the worst. I'm so terrible. This is why I hesitate to take initiation, because I see myself. I see where I'm at, you know, and I'm like, I know that, you know, it's very clear that there's never going to be a time when you're like 100%, I'll never break my vows, but I at least want to be like fixed and have been fixed for a while to a certain standard. So yeah. So you know, I think the thing about initiation, I remember a while ago, it ties very much in with, there's a couple things. Firstly, for me, vows in our movement, in our Bhakti Vedanta, they tie very much in, and this has already been raised, with our relationship with our guru and how personal that is, and how close we are with our guru. I think this is another kind of tangent that could stem from this conversation about vows, is the guru-disciple relationship. And there's a lot to talk about for that amongst, you know, our society as well, which is yeah, there's so much to dive into there. But essentially with vows, you know, the way I see it is, for myself, yeah, I would like to be able to at least be confident that I'm going to have a good shot at being steady with this. So like I said, I've broken so many vows until now that I just know I can't take initiation. I'm just nowhere near ready. It's just, if I were, it would be a joke. That's how I would see it. It would be a joke, because it's a real thing. It's a serious thing. And, you know, it's a little bit about respect. You know, I'm entering into a relationship with this person who's asking me to do a certain thing. And if I know going into that, then I'm just going to be like, at some point, I'm going to just like, yo, today my 16 rounds. To be honest with you, that's the hardest one for me, I think, at the moment. I mean, the illicit sex one is an interesting one. I'm married, so that's another kind of interesting subject. What's classed as illicit sex and what's not classed as illicit sex? But for me, it's
at least that word is there. It gives that wiggle room.
The illicit, yeah. Heard your story. So, I mean, you can kind of tell what my thoughts are on that already by saying that if what I think my major problem is taking initiation right now is my 16 rounds, then you can probably feel what my sentiments are on what illicit sex means. But yeah, it's something that's very personal with the guru. It's required. Why is it required? Exactly because of what Karuna said. You know, in my, I could be wrong here, but my general feeling with everything to do with Bhakti Yoga is actually Bhakti Yoga is not about rules and regulations. Bhakti Yoga is about spontaneous love. That's the essence. That's the saragrahi, right? Is that the right word, saragrahi? I got that right? I picked that up in our
Sara. Yes, essence. Sara.
The Sara. Okay. So, what's the essence of what we do? We're trying to develop a spontaneous, loving relationship with Krishna. So, first of all, where are all these rules coming from? Rules aren't about love. Love's spontaneous. And we even hear once you've achieved a certain level of advancement, you don't need to worry about rules. You do it spontaneously. But why are the rules important? And this was actually something I had to come to terms with, because I was a little bit anti-rules. I was anti this idea that I have to take initiation. I don't want to have to do anything in my life. You know, it's like, why do I have to do that? Surely it's personal. I can just do it with me and Krishna. I don't have to do that. But I can't, it makes sense to me. And a large part of what makes sense to me is exactly what Kuna just said, is that it gives us something. There's a mundane aspect of like, it gives us a reason to stick to this process, which is going to take us to that spontaneous thing. And it's potentially possible to do without making these vows to someone, but it's going to be way, 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 way freaking harder, near impossible from what I understand. So they're very important. At a certain stage, all of us have to do it. I hope to get there myself. I'm not there yet. But yeah, very, very important.
Okay, I want to get into this thing about the guru relationship. It was much further down on my list of questions, but since it's already come up quite a few times, let's just get into it now. As far as my understanding of philosophy goes, we hear in this Bhakti tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, about the sadhana krama, the various stages in which, you know, love of God blossoms, beginning with faith and then culminating in the achievement of divine love, prema. So in that sequence of verses, you have faith, and then you have association of sadhus, specifically the association of the guru who will instruct you in the performance of worship of God, bhajan. And then you have bhajan kriya. So bhajan kriya means the practice of worship of God, basically. And that is also understood to be the stage in which initiation takes place. If ever you've heard any lectures about it, initiation takes place at the stage of bhajan kriya. You're initiated into the path of worship of God. If your bhajan is real dope, which is another subject matter altogether, but if you got some dope bhajan, then you have anartha nivritti. So the removal of the unwanted things. Now, the root anartha, according to our main literature, Bhagavad Purana, the root anartha is the concept that I am this material body, basically. Yaya samohito jiva atmanam trigunatmakam paropi manyute anartham. The root anartha is I think I'm this body. I think I'm a product of matter. So if you do some dope bhajan, you can get over that anartha, and then you become steady. And then from steadiness, it efflorescence even more. It's really nice. So let's just talk about these little stages here: bhajan, anartha, nivritti, and nishta. In between those stages, so because of anartha, I have strong predilection toward matter because I think I'm a product of matter. And just because you tell me I'm not a product of matter, okay, great, I'm not product of matter. And then after that, I'm going to go do something that tells me that I'm a product of matter. So when you make a vow, like the 4 regulative principles, for example, that set of restrictions in this context here, which before you've achieved anartha nivritti, which comes after initiation, and it comes after dope bhajan, after some dope practices, probably for a period of a long time. When you make those vows in the beginning, that which is understood to be the effect of some dope application of bhakti yoga over a period of time. Again, I'm asking the same question. Is it prudent to allow ourselves to make those commitments when in all likelihood, we're not going to be able to keep those commitments because we have yet to achieve, anartha nivritti, because our worship ain't that dope, at least not yet. that's what I'm curious about. And the reason I'm curious about this is because I guess my personal experience isn't so much like this, but I have observed this, a sort of demoralization that takes place. And actually, Madhua, you kind of indicated it to some degree, because I've broken so many vows, you don't really have the ability to trust yourself anymore, that you can do anything, right? And that's been my experience when I've broken vows. Like, now if someone says, can you do this? I'm like, homie, just don't ask me to do anything, because I can't trust myself right now. So it's like a general demoralization that comes from not being able to keep vows. So when people make these sorts of vows in the beginning, which are understood to be really in some ways the effect, and I'm specifically zooming in on the fourth regular principle, the effect of having overcome anartha, beginning with the Bali concept of life. And then you're not able to keep that vow. You feel demoralized, and then you become somewhat like apathetic to your practices, to your bhajan. You maybe even become extremely doubtful, because not only are you not able to follow, but you talk to your homies and ain't none of them doing it either, and they all initiate it. So then it creates this like general culture of like apathy and demoralization. And so going back to my original question, when we understand that freedom from the attraction to matter that would cause one to engage in all sorts of activities, illicit activities, really happens at the stage when you've overcome anartha because of some dope worship of God over a period of time. Is it prudent to make those sorts of promises in the beginning and risk apathy and demoralization and general sense of jadedness, maybe increased doubt and so on? And I want to bring in the guru element also here, but I'm kind of rephrasing my question here in the context of how I understand the philosophy. All right, go. And that's, I guess, this is from the side of the disciple, and let me bring it from the side of the guru. Like, I'm not questioning Prabhupada's implementation of standards. The guru has authority. If you are a disciple, the guru has authority over you. He could tell you whatever you want. And if you're really surrendering, then what is the problem? So I'm not questioning here. What I guess I'm opening up conversation to is that, is it even prudent for gurus to kind of impose this sort of uniform standard on followers without consideration if they've done some dope ass, bhajan to get over anartha, and thus risk, in a sense, putting their disciples in a situation where they will not be able to follow and feel demoralized and jaded and all of these sorts of things. So I guess I'm asking from both sides. On the one side, disciples making commitments at the beginning to things that are really the effect after a certain point. And then gurus also kind of encouraging that. That's kind of what I'm asking here. I think it's clear, right? It's kind of sensitive, and I'm not even meaning this to be controversial. These are just like my genuine contemplations around this sort of subject matter.
And we will also give you like genuine answers. I just want to bring some other element into it. When Abhay shares his thoughts, Abhay Prabhu, can you also answer this question from the standpoint of someone who has taken initiation in a different Gaudiya Sangha with, as far as I understand, slightly different standards? I don't actually know what the standards are in Narayan Maharaj's Sangha, so maybe you can also just tell us about that and just give that perspective.
Yeah, so in 2009 and then in 2010, I took first and second initiation from Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. And that being said, the context that I have growing up was within ISKCON. So I've grown up in Alachua. Most of my devotional association is within the context of ISKCON. And I derive a lot of nourishment from my association with ISKCON devotees. And so I'm at least somewhat well aware of the standards there and some of the dynamics that exist from people who are taking initiation within ISKCON. So I think to Jai Jagannath's questions about, is it prudent for a disciple to accept vows or to commit to vows that are very unlikely to be maintained perfectly, because the underlying condition that causes the causes the effect of breaking those vows is not cured except for the performance of Bhajan, in which you are just beginning at the point of initiation, right? So it's a bit of a catch-22. It's like you're making these vows at the front end that really you can't be expected realistically to maintain perfectly until the full effect and realization of what you're just now committing to has kind of fructified in your life and in your heart.
Right.
So it's a bit of a difficult situation. I mean, the thing I would say is that just in principle, I've experienced this many times in my life, and then I'll bring it back to the point of spiritual initiation, that the value of making a tough commitment or accepting a heavy burden of meaningful responsibility is to discover all of the ways in which you are inadequate to uphold that meaningful responsibility or to achieve that goal, and to then progressively overcome each of those limitations that you then discover by taking on the commitment of that responsibility. And so I think that the process of kind of becoming 100% qualified and then making the commitment is a bit of a non-starter, because you don't discover the ways in which you need to become qualified until you make the commitment. I've experienced this, for example, like with parenting. It's like, you know, you hear this a lot these days. It's like, I need to work on all my stuff first and get me straight, and then I'll have kids. You know, but like
having kids, bro.
Yeah, it's guess you're never having kids, basically. And like having kids and taking on that responsibility is the act that uncovers all of the ways in which you are inadequate, or you at least are perceiving yourself as unqualified to be a good father or a good mother. The act of making the commitment reveals all of the ways in which you need to improve, basically, to put it simply. And so I think that the commitment on the front end is a necessary component of actually becoming qualified. You can't become qualified without the commitment. And the other thing is that philosophically, our shastras acknowledge this dynamic. So the first anga of the 64 angas of bhakti, ado gurvashrayam, the very first anga of the 64 angas is to take shelter of the spiritual master, and then to take diksha and shiksha, and then to serve with intimacy, Vishambena Guru Seva. These are the first three angas of bhakti, described by Rupa Goswami. And within the category of bhajan kriya, which one actually begins at the point of initiation, because there's no bhajan without getting the admittance into the realm of bhakti by the guard, or the one who has the quality to admit you into the realm of bhakti is the guru. So you can't perform bhajana kriya without taking shelter of the spiritual master. And within the category of bhajana kriya, if you read Madhurya Kadambini by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there's the whole subcategory of anishtita bhakti, unsteady bhakti. So this is a category of devotional progress in the career of a sadhaka that is like literally specifically delineated and accommodated for and explained and described as part of the natural process of bhakti for every sadhaka. For every sadhaka is to go through this phase of anishtita bhakti between bhajan kriya, anartha-nivritti, and then nishta, when you're fixed. So it's literally called out. And one of anishtita bhakti has 6 parts. I was just reading this. I don't have this committed to memory, by the way. I was just reading this to prepare. So one of the 6 parts is niyama akshama. And so, and before that is vishaya sangara, which is basically like associating with the objects of sense enjoyment, which we make vows to not associate with at the time of initiation. And there's niyama akshama, which is the inability to uphold vows. And so all that to say that I think it is somewhat expected that the commitment to certain vows, not as an escape hatch for this, but the commitment to certain vows, despite the intense sincerity of the disciple, is not. It is very unlikely that at that point they'll be maintained perfectly, but they are a necessary component of discovering all of the ways in which one needs to develop to be able to maintain those. And it is accommodated for in the descriptions of sadhana bhakti in our line. So I would say, if you had to put me in a column, it's like make the vows, even if you don't feel perfectly capable of maintaining them, or even if you see around you that people who you consider more qualified than yourself have made those vows and have not been able to keep them, that is not reason to not make them, because by not making them, you are basically robbing yourself of the opportunity to discover the path that you need to follow in order to qualify yourself, basically. I hope that's well stated.
Wow, brilliant. I'm very
That was-
satisfied with that.
Yeah, that was so good. We're also getting some
Wow.
appreciation from the listeners. Ram Govinda Das says, really well said, Abai, and Ujval Das says, perfect answer. So yeah, Abai really nailed it. I could just come in very briefly and say, you know, how does one learn to swim? By swimming.
Yes.
You know, ultimately. I think that's what it essentially boils down to. And then just something brief on is it prudent from the perspective of the spiritual master, from the guru? Well, I think that we should look at the example that our founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada set for us ultimately, because he came into a space, into a culture, into the Western world where everyone, I mean, it was like literally the wildest time in contemporary history. You know, people were doing the craziest, most bananas kind of stuff that you can imagine in those hippie days. And he entered right into that and basically imposed the strictest possible Vedic standard of purity, like onto these crazy, drugged out, sexed out Western kids. And what was the rationale behind that? We see that so many of them came through, but of course there were also you know, there were also those that didn't make it. But you know, can you sacrifice one person for the sake of a family? Yes. Can you sacrifice a family for the sake of a village for the sake of a province, and a province for the sake of a country? Yes. So ultimately, you know, we're not gonna establish a society in this world where a culture of love of God is spread if we do not set certain standards, and we do not expect people to follow those standards, because those standards are fundamentally necessary for us to reach the ultimate goal. And then okay, let me leave it there. But then at this point, okay, the commitments have been made. Now what then comes in with Sri Guru is that Sri Guru provides personal guidance to each individual. How are you to execute? Where are you relative to these standards? Perhaps there is a spectrum when it comes to these standards. Where do you fall? What is necessary for you in your spiritual life? And now, because we have many big gurus in our society that are initiating thousands of people, they can't provide that for every person. But there are also shiksha gurus. There are also instructing gurus and seniors who can help us along. So then it can be tailored for every person. But that commitment to the fundamental principles of purity is irrefutably necessary.
I like that from the angle of the guru. Madhu, you want to jump on this?
Well, yeah, okay.
If not, you're not forced. I'm just asking because I was about to run my mouth.
No, I
like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Okay, listen, that was a fantastic, if you want to call it an answer, that was a fantastic answer to the question. I really appreciated that answer. And it gave rise to some questions, because it seems to me, and I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here, that you could say that it was very simple. It was very simple. And essentially the simple answer was, yeah, make the vows even if you know you're not going to keep them, because that's part of getting to the end goal, which I kind of disagree with, although I appreciate the point. And it's actually been very encouraging for me to hear it. Honestly, you're kind of shifting my my personal perspective, just hearing that, because I had a
How does that
slightly
affect
different.
on us?
Yeah. Well, it's, you know what it is. It's Shastra Chakshush. It's hearing from Shastra, which is something that you devotees are much better at doing than me, much better read than I am, and something I need to work on, actually. I talk more from just my own crap. So
Me too, bro. We're in the same boat. Like we have two pundits here, like Jai and Abai, and then you and I are just talking experientially as potato heads, and that's fine. So don't worry.
As long as it's clear from the start where I'm coming from, then it's all good. So anyway, listen, here's my question to that, because I like the answer. Surely there has to be some, like, surely you can't go into it knowing full well you're going to break it. That seems silly to me. That seems silly. Knowing full well I'm coming into this knowing I can't maintain this, right? So the way I fix that in my head, there has to be a relationship with the guru. So, because if I'm coming in, and let's say, for example, in ISKCON, the standard in ISKCON is 16 rounds, 4 regulative principles, and let's not even go into the illicit thing, but 16 rounds and 4 regulative principles, right? Assuming you can have sex with your wife. Let's say that, yeah? Just that, making that assumption. Separate discussion, sidebar that for later, but let's make that assumption. You're allowed to have sex with your wife, yeah?
Yay!
So, yeah. Okay, so now
everything said on this podcast is GBC approved.
So I should at least have the intention and somewhat of the idea that I'm pretty sure I can more or less stick to this, more or less. Now, obviously, there's the less part, which we know exists, and there's what I'm hearing is that is built in. That's understood. Krishna knows. He knows that we're not perfect. But we have to come in with the intention of trying to be perfect. If I come in with the intention, like, I ain't going to be perfect, but who cares?
Yeah.
That's the wrong way to approach it. That's the wrong way to approach it. So, and that's kind of taking, to me, that's almost like taking advantage of the situation a little bit, you know? And it opens the door for so many kinds of, like, wrong reasons for taking initiation. We see it. People do it for, you know, recognition. People do it for so many things. And it opens that door of, like, well, hey, I can just take initiation. And guess what? It's authorized because it doesn't matter if I break my vows anyway. That's part of the system. So, you know, it's like, I guess, I guess it's a question. And I would say that it's a hard one to note, to what's the word? Monitor, because it's a very personal thing. It's a very personal thing. You have to have that intention, at least, of wanting to try and be sincere. And that's where the relationship with the guru comes in, because, you know, I think, Abba, you didn't tell us yet about the Diksha system within Narayan Maharaj's, you know, circle. But I know that within the Gaudiya Math, it's not always 16. It can be less. It can be more.
Yeah.
So, and that's where this idea of having a personal relationship with your guru comes in. I think that was actually the thing I wanted to touch on before Abai so eloquently raised this subject. But the idea of having a personal relationship with your guru, so that your guru knows you, so that, because, for example, maybe I do need to take initiation, but hey, maybe I'm not ready for 16 rounds. So my guru knowing me, might say, Madhva, you fool, chant 2 rounds a day and take initiation. You see? Because he knows me and he's willing to enter into that relationship with me. And you know, so, but if you don't have that relationship and you're just taking the vows because that's what I'm supposed to do, and you know, then I think that's opening the door for trouble, personally.
Yeah, this is a very good Purva Paksha, actually. I'm glad you brought it up. It's very good. It leads to another thing. I want to hear the answer to this from you guys. And it connects us another question I had on my little notepad here. Is a sort of, I'm going to use this word, performative nature of initiation, at least within the ISKCON family. And by performative, I don't mean that people are putting on a show. Like, I don't believe initiates are putting on a show. But by performative, I mean, it's like a big event. You know, the whole maybe community comes, you're in front of the deities, from the guru, in front of the fire pit. So it's like, it's very performative. You're at least some of us, we were handed scripts, like literal scripts to read out, which I actually think is a good idea because you start freaking out when you get in front of the guru. So having a script can be really helpful, but you're like handed a script and then you read out your lines basically of, I vow to do this, I vow to do that, I vow to chant this many rounds and so on. So it's like, it has a very
God. That just reeks of like organized religion. God.
I know. Anyway, so there's this like, at least within the ISKCON family and our own experience within that sector of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there's like a strong performative nature. So let me see what you guys think about this. I do know disciples, they actually talk to their guru beforehand about the regular principles. Anyway, about the regular principle. And they told their gurus flat out, I'm not going to be able to follow this. Like I know full well, I'm not going to be able to follow this. And their guru was also encouraging them to take the initiation. So the guru, being understanding, said that's okay, but you try to move towards the standard as in relationship to the growth of your own practice of bhakti, which was like beautiful and wonderful. However, having had an understanding with their guru in the background, when it came to the time of initiation, you went through your lines as you were supposed to. And it has like, and that's what I mean, like a kind of very performative feature to it. Whereas how I imagine initiation, this could just be my imagination. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure how Diksha worked out, but the way I kind of hear it when I'm reading Shastra is that it was largely very personal. Like you going up to the guru who's like on the bank of the Jamuna chanting Bhajan, wondering why this guy is disturbing me. And you're kind of being tested and proving your surrender. And then the guru kind of initiating you is in a kind of very intimate sort of private affair. And it may not be that everyone knows who your guru actually is. It was like a very, now that maybe doesn't work in an institution. So that's another angle here. But with the angle that I'm bringing up, just kind of amplifying what Madhu was saying about the importance of the relationship with the guru, is that there seems to be this strong performative feature within this sector of the Gaudiya family that makes us like, maybe even in an act of self-delusion, rise to the occasion, and then later on, not really having that intention in heart or not really reconciling your own problems inside, and then just not following at all. And so, yeah, what do you think about this? This is intended to be an amplification of what Madhu is saying, how important and intimate the relationship should ideally be if you're going to really make an authentic commitment and not just on the strength of philosophy, find some wiggle room to make a commitment that you actually have no intention in keeping, but just keeping up with the show of it. And, in terms of the institution you're in or whatever, you just go through the motions. So what is your answer to this? Purva Paksha.
I just have one quick input here. Ujjvala made a super cool comment, and he said, I think the linchpin here is the word customizable. Abai used earlier. The fact that due to institutionalization in ISKCON, that particular liberty of the guru to gauge the aptitude of a disciple is a bit hampered.
Yes, absolutely. So my questions along those lines also. Just sorry to be dominating the space here. Just to that comment, I was talking to one guru, not going to say who it was, but I was talking to one guru. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. He wanted to initiate a disciple. The disciple had a loving relationship, so we'll just leave it at that, with their significant other. And so there was no question of them following the regular principles to the T, nor were they ready or willing to chant 16 rounds necessarily. So the guru kind of came up to me in a sort of friendly spirit. It's like, what do you think about this? And I was like, first of all, is this a trick question? I'm not trying to go to hell. But he was just gauging because he saw me studying all the time. So he had some interest what I had to say on this. So I just asked him as a guru, I'm like, you're the guru. Can't you just tell them, like, it's between you and them? Like, what's the problem? And I didn't say it like that. Obviously, I was way more reverent in my language, but the spirit was like that. Like, you're the guru. Can't you just say, all right, chant 4 rounds and do like this. Like, what's the problem? And he kind of like laughed and was like, yeah, kind of walked off, And I still couldn't understand if I committed a transgression or not. But he kind of like walked off. And so, yeah, what about this sort of thing? Ujjwala's comment, Madhwa's Purva how you would navigate these sorts of things?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that, like, the purpose and mission of ISKCON, I think, has to be understood to then understand why certain standards and the way that ISKCON has been institutionalized and maintained make more sense. The ISKCON is, I think, it is and will be the primary vehicle for distributing Krishna consciousness on a global scale, and that is like the particular intent that Srila Prabhupada had for the institution. And so to do that, there are certain decisions that have to be made at an institutional level that wouldn't have to be made if, the context for a certain Sangha was, a certain guru and their followers within a very small region, for example, just to kind of
Right.
create an alternative scenario in which the disciple guru relationship could and would be and does become established within Gaudiya Vaishnavism or within Vaishnavism more broadly. And so I don't see it purely as like a bug, to use like a software terminology, that the 4 regs and the 16 rounds are like the global societal institutionalized standard. That's kind of, it's like a feature of the system as opposed to a bug of the system, in the sense that enables the global, very rapid expansion of Krishna consciousness and the creation of so many devotees in so many different cultures, so many different countries, by so many different gurus who have their own differences in terms of their personal backgrounds, in terms of how they came to Krishna consciousness, in terms of what they emphasize and what they appreciate about Krishna consciousness, and therefore emphasize to their disciples, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, for it to be maintained at a global level within the institution, there has to be some amount of uniformity, and that enables the quick global expansion of the society. And that also has some trade-offs, right? It has the trade-offs that we've been describing, where there's less personal flexibility and customization on behalf of the disciple and on behalf of the guru, within the context of initiation, or even more broadly within the context of like providing shiksha. Like, those aren't as clearly established, but there are kind of certain unspoken standards about what shiksha and what kata should look like within ISKCON. And there's more variety there, I'd say, but there's also that side of things. So that's the first thing, is to kind of like give credit where credit's due. Like, those standards have enabled a lot of very beautiful things that we all benefit from. And so I think that's important to acknowledge. And at the same time, I think the problems are there. I remember one time, I won't use any names, of course, but a friend of mine here in Alachua who has had a lot of trouble in their life, spiritually speaking, at one point was really inspired by one particular spiritual master who was in town. And she was telling that to another friend, and I was overhearing the conversation. So there's a group of 3. One person was really inspired, and she was saying, like, I feel like approaching this guru for instruction, at least to reveal my heart, that I'm feeling for the first time in my life, like I could like surrender as a disciple. And I never thought I'd say that. And one of the other people in the conversation was like, you should go and tell them. You should go tell them. And then the other person was, you're not doing anything. You're not anywhere close to the standard. Don't tell them yet. You're not ready for initiation. You're not even close to that. And I felt like I was over hearing that conversation, and I felt like in that moment, a kind of cosmic cataclysm had just taken place, and I know that person did not approach the guru in that situation, having been discouraged in that way. And so I think that that's obviously an individualized, relatively extreme example of what can happen. But I think that some version of that dynamic happens all the time, is where people are preventing themselves from becoming recipients of further mercy and further association because they know internally that they're not up to the societal standard. And so it's encouraging to hear that there are cases of more individualized conversations happening, even if on the surface the society has to maintain. And when I say on the surface, I don't mean like wink, wink, this is our standard. I mean like as a global blanket standard, this is the standard. But disciples should, I think, or aspiring disciples should approach the spiritual master that they're aspiring for and that they are inspired by to reveal their personal circumstances. And in that way, at least, they are not preventing themselves from developing a relationship prior to initiation. And in some cases, depending on the guru, depending on the disciple, some specific accommodations can be made. And that may be a nice kind of interim solution for some.
That just brings up something really, really essential, Abai, and I think this is something that we really have to keep in mind. And for the conditioned Western mind, it's a very, very foreign concept, and that is the notion of mercy or kriya. Because I think that we can have this entire conversation from the point of view that ultimately, like, our spiritual life, our entire spiritual conquest is up to our own determination and our own, willpower and our effort. But we actually understand from our philosophy that we are all just essentially products of mercy. And if it's because mercy is also kind of a weird word, I think, for Westerners, and we can maybe replace it just with kindness, with just like completely unconditional acceptance and kindness. I have one very dear friend. His name is Gopi Jivanadas, and he's so expert at putting himself in the like, how shall I call it, like almost like in the crossfire of mercy. He always just places himself so well just to get the attention and the just the kindness of the great souls.
I love that.
I love that.
Really,
I love that so much. It's so good.
The crossfire of mercy.
That's like a devotional skill to develop.
Yeah. You gotta be so greedy for it. It's like I had this thing. Okay, I'll tell this like little anecdote. I went for 2 years, 2018 and 2019. I went on the Polish tour, Indra Swami's Polish tour, and I was kind of observing his way of just going about his day, right? And I noticed that one of the things that he really likes to do is he really likes to, at lunchtime at the festival site, he really likes to sit down on one of the benches and help to serve prasadam to the devotees, right? Sanctified foodstuffs. And then I also noticed that he particularly likes to serve kofta balls. So on 2 separate occasions, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go sit on that bench right next to the kofta balls, and I'm gonna serve the potatoes or whatever next to the kofta balls, because I know he's gonna come sit there and he's gonna notice me and we're gonna have a fat chat. I was just like, I knew, and it worked so well. Both of those times I had some of the most, I think, 2 of the most enlivening conversations in my entire spiritual life. And actually after the second conversation, I was super fortunate because he was like, so he has like this camper van, right? Like this super luxurious camper van thing, which gets parked on the festival site, and that's kind of like where he chills. So, then after sort of towards the end of the second conversation, he was like, hey, why don't you come over to the camper later and we can talk more, So I went in, and in that particular conversation, he was, I was bringing out my trepidation about reading the Bhagavatam because it's just such a like monumental thing. And that's when he told me, you should read Brihad Bhagavatamrita. And Brihad Bhagavatamrita is now just like my favorite, most relishable, dearest to my heart, just amazing shastra, And why did I get that? Because I was greedy for the mercy. So anyway, just bringing it back to this element of mercy is just that, like, we need to situate ourselves, we need to put ourselves in the crossfire of mercy. Then it really actually, I feel, balances out so much of this entire equation.
Nice. I feel like that kind of amplifies this idea of making certain commitments and not being able to hold up to them, and then discovering within yourself what's required for you to move toward that standard. This was a bias point. And part of that discovery, it seems, is learning that I need to develop this skill of getting in the crossfire of mercy.
Yeah, dude.
I really appreciate that. I have one other idea here. I mean, this side of the conversation has been fleshed out very nicely. The other side one, and I brought this up earlier, is initiates or aspiring initiates into the cult making commitments and not keeping their word. I'm saying the cult because it's funny and because it's true also to some degree. So getting an initiation and making certain commitments. Okay, let me say it like this. Human life in general is filled with a lot of moral tensions. And in my notes to you guys, I kind of sent this. A moral tension, for example, is like the ideal and the reality. That's a moral tension. Should I try to go for the ideal or should I be real? Another moral tension that happens a lot is the society versus the individual. That's another example of a moral tension. This is a societal standard, but I need to think about an individual standard. For example, or here's a uniform standard, I need a more customized thing. So there are a lot of moral tensions that we encounter. And one of the moral tensions that I feel like when it comes to making vows, especially when you're part of a larger institution, whatever it may be, is that we tend to favor the ideal or the society side of the equation than the real or individual side of the equation. In terms of like what we do for others to see. But what happens inside is another story altogether. And so just to give an example of this, I brought this up earlier. You'll make a vow that is in favor of the ideal or the society standard, for example. But inside, you're feeling whatever you're feeling, and you're not able to actually meet up to that side. Like in navigating that moral tension, you may have, I'm not finding the word, you may have went too far on this side of the equation and not enough on your reality and your individual requirements. And so what happens, you're not able to live up to that. And again, the result of not being able to do that is that you lose trust in yourself and you feel demoralized, you feel jaded, your doubts increase. You may talk to others who are of similar kind. And so that doesn't really help that much. And so I've noticed, at least I feel like I've noticed this in my family, where you see like a lot of I call them non-practicing devotees. They're devotees, in their heart of hearts, they're devotees and they're wonderful, but they don't practice anymore. And there may be several reasons that leads to the state of not practicing. But in conversations with a few of them, one of the parts that comes up a lot in casual conversation is just not being able to meet standards and feeling demoralized by that. Whether they say they're demoralized or not, it becomes self-evident by the nature of the speech that this might be going on inside. So I guess the question that I have is that as a newer generation, is it, and we're kind of knowing these dynamics, we're discussing these dynamics right now, as a newer generation, how are we supposed to navigate these sort of moral tensions so that we might come out more successful in the end? That's the question that I'm curious about. Like nowadays, I would not exactly recommend anyone, for example, if I know they're having a hard time with something and they come to me and say, Jai, what do you think I should do? Should I take initiation? I usually will say, well, why don't you talk to your guru about this first and see what they say? But don't just like do it and then end up another statistic in a sense where you're like some demoralized guy that feels that they can't follow. And then that becomes like the rest of your, maybe not the rest of your life, it becomes a big portion of time lost in life because of this. I guess I'm just asking how should we not, the next generation coming up, we're going to be giving guidance to people, our children, even our friends, our younger brothers of sorts, God brothers or otherwise. And we have all these nuances playing out in our head right now. How might you guide them today in dealing with these sorts of dilemmas? This might be like my final little thing here.
You mind if I freeball this one?
Please.
Before we hear from the more educated amongst us. Well, I really like the question, and it's because I'm that person. I felt like that. I already shared that with you. Like I said, my vow is to never make another vow. So yeah, this year actually has been a very interesting year for me, and it's shed some light on this topic for me. What is that feeling of demoralization? For me, it's guilt. For me, that feeling, if you were to go, what is that feeling that's making me demoralized? It's guilt. And I used to feel this a lot. In fact, because I've been that guy, that non-practicing devotee for long periods of my life. You know, I was very inspired during my, I don't know, in my mid-teens, I got inspired. You know, I went through a phase where I was like completely not practicing and doing a whole bunch of silly stuff, drinking, smoking, hanging out with my friends, all of that stuff. Certain age, I got about 16 years old. I got some good association. I went on a Pundavasena trip in England. We went to Spain. It was fantastic. I got to see a bunch of other people my age inspired in Krishna consciousness, and it kind of flipped me, and I became quite inspired, and I was practicing, doing a lot more until about the age of 2021. And then I really kind of entered the working world, and my focus shifted to like earning money, and that became my priority over my Krishna consciousness. This is just putting it very, very simply. There's obviously more to it, but that was essentially it. And then roughly from the age of like 21 till almost 27, 28, the only consistent thing I did in my Krishna consciousness was kirtan. That was the only consistent thing I did. I didn't read consistently. I didn't do japa consistently. I didn't even throw myself in the crossfire of good association consistently. You know, I wasn't doing any of these things that really I should have been doing. And so when I used to go to kirtan, because I grew up around the manor, I used to go to kirtan at the manor. I used to pay my obeisances in front of Srila Prabhupada as I walked into the temple room. Almost every time I felt guilty. I'm like, man, I don't even know why I've come to the kirtan today. I'm clearly here because I want name and fame. I'm not doing this for Krishna. Why am I, should I even be here? And then I have that feeling whilst I'm paying my obeisances, and then I get up and I go do kirtan. So, and what I found for myself is that feeling of guilt is extremely uninspiring. It's counterproductive when you have a goal that you want to achieve. We need to feel inspired. If we feel inspired to do something, it's more likely that we're going to do it. And this year, I was reminded, I also used to think that like, I'm so far away from Krishna consciousness. I'm never going to be able to become Krishna conscious. Look at me. And this year, a couple of very, very good friends of mine, a couple from America, they came and they visited us this year, and they shared with me a concept which really flipped this idea of guilt on its head. And it was the idea that I can actually be Krishna conscious, even in my sorry state that I'm right now. So for example, when I'm paying my obeisances, that is the performance of Krishna consciousness. That's the performance of bhakti yoga. I'm performing bhakti yoga right now when I get down to pay my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. This act, this such a mundane thing, is me performing Krishna consciousness. Therefore, it's elevating me. When I think about it like that, it's like, yo, I'm gonna stay down here for ages. Or when I think, even though I'm chanting my rounds, they may not be perfect, it's moving me along my path. It's taking me closer to my goal. So this idea that I can be Krishna conscious even in this state that I'm in now very much inspired me. That's one thing, and that transitions the kind of the feeling of, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so horrible, I'm not maintaining my vows, I'm so this, I'm so that. That's guilt, and that's going to just make you feel worse, and it's going to make you do less ultimately. Whereas if you're able to transition that feeling to, oh wow, you know, if I chant my rounds today, that's going to take me closer to Krishna. You know, even if my rounds aren't perfect, it's going to take me closer. That kind of feeling, because I'm performing Krishna consciousness, I'm connected with Krishna in this moment, to whatever degree. That's very inspiring. And I'd like to raise one other point before I pass it off. Is this guilt? Again, it ties into your relationship with your guru. How honest are you with your guru? Because we feel guilty when we're behaving out of integrity with ourselves, out of integrity with what we've said we will do. So if you've told your guru, I'm going to do 16 rounds, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, blah, 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 and then you're not, and your guru doesn't know that you're not, you're going to feel guilty. You're going to feel guilty as hell. And that's just going to continue to demoralize you. And you're going to, like you said, Jai, you said you're just going to become another statistic, that non-practicing devotee. And it's like a downward spiral from guilt. If you're able to acknowledge, man, I've messed up, I'm not following my vows, you know, but firstly, step back from that. Ideally, catch it at the beginning, be genuine with your guru, tell them from the beginning and set realistic goals from the start. If you haven't done that and you're now in a situation where you're like demoralized and struggling, be honest, open up, tell your guru, tell your friends, tell your shiksha, and look for that encouraging, you know, look for that mercy to help lift you back up. But being honest is also going to help you feel more in integrity and therefore less guilty. So even if you're not doing it, you're being honest about it. Therefore, you're going to feel less guilty about it. And that in and of itself is going to help you get back on track.
Jai, I really like that. So you're saying basically, hey, Guru Dave. So yeah, I'm in a phase of my life right now where basically not practicing. I just wanted to let you know. And if you have some words of encouragement, that would be great. Yeah, but I'm not practicing right now. Just thought I'd let you know.
I don't really know what I'm saying, to be honest. But being honest, that feeling of that connection between honesty and guilt and being in integrity with yourself.
Absolutely.
It's just that it's the guilt thing that's going to just continue to take you down the wrong way. If you let that swallow you, it's continue to demoralize you.
Very nice.
I love that.
Balaram Perez says thank you for what you shared. He really appreciates.
Balaram, the legend.
Yeah.
All right, Ka, Abai, any thoughts on this? And I have my final thoughts on this too, based on this conversation.
Yeah,
okay.
Karunaji, please go.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Just briefly, I just want to bring in how the fundamental characteristic of the material world is that it is a place of duality, and so we see that in our society, this characteristic of duality has also manifested in the form of very black and white standards that is that the institution mandates for because it all really comes down to acceptance. What do you have to do and what do you have to not do to be accepted, right? Because we all have this need for acceptance. We all need to belong somewhere. We all need a kind of a social milieu in which we feel we belong. And so in the kind of like more general society of ISKCON, because there are these super rigid standards, I think a lot of people just make these commitments for the sake of having that status of being a true member of the society, by having a cool name and, a guru. And it's like just for the sake of feeling like you belong. And that element definitely plays into it very greatly. I have observed this in certain communities and sanghas that I've been involved with, that is there. So I think, I don't know exactly where I'm going with this now, but I just think that we need to really seriously discern, as a society, and also just as individuals, like, why is it that we just need to accept each other more, regardless of the level, or whatever it may be. It's just, we need to create a culture of acceptance. There's a psychologist, one of the famous ones, Carl Rogers, who has one of his 3 pillars of the therapeutic approach is unconditional positive regard. That we really need to regard everyone that we come in contact with in the society as just a person who's really just trying their best to do something of significance and to achieve the highest goal of life, and just to be seen, just to be seen. And we shouldn't have to make these super intense commitments necessarily just for the sake, just to be seen and acknowledged as like a worthwhile human being, yeah.
Nice. Well, boy, G, I know words.
Well, yeah. I mean, so many nice points have been made already.
Yes.
I think, if to your original question of how would I encourage somebody who's struggling with a dilemma personally, maybe who wants initiation or who's feeling inspired like that, but is unsure of their ability to maintain the standards that they would commit to. One thing I want to say is that I think we're taking it as a given that the internal response to making commitments and not keeping them is some kind of damaging guilt or shame. I think that is maybe an assumption worth examining. And so I'm really glad that Madhvaprabhu brought that up. Like, I don't think that is necessarily the correct response of a sadhaka who makes certain commitments and then finds themselves unable to maintain them, either in a chronic pattern or as in one-off cases. I think that some amount of kind of like of self-criticism is good and is exemplified by our acharyas, but kind of wallowing in guilt and shame in such a way that causes you to isolate yourself from the actual sources of the ability to overcome your difficulties, i.e. the devotees and the guru and devotional circles and devotional practices, which can be a response to not maintaining your vows, or to seeing yourself as kind of like spiritually unsuccessful or unqualified in one way or another. One of the responses can be, therefore, I should not be amongst the society of the devotees. I'm unqualified, right? I should isolate myself. But you're essentially guaranteeing the perpetuation of that problem in that case, because that is the medicine. Devotional service, the devotees, that association is the medicine. And so I think that's one thing that I would bring up and maybe encourage in a one-to-one circumstance, is that is examining the relationship that we have to not maintaining our vows, or to making blunders on the path of Krishna consciousness more broadly, which are basically guaranteed to happen. And so when they do happen, what is the correct response emotionally, behaviorally? I think that there's a lot of unhealthy assumptions about what that response is, and there's a lot of unhealthy examples when other people, like what we see as the response to that one should feel, and in terms of the behavior, et cetera, I think can be off. And I think that's the thing that I would encourage. Yes, on the front end, if you can develop a personal relationship with the guru and get more personalized instructions from the spiritual master, that should help. But even in that case, one is not guaranteed to be successful in executing those customized instructions. And if to kind of play the other side of things, your guru might give you more strict customized regulations than the societal standard.
Right.
You should never do prajalpa. It's like, okay, that's more difficult than all of the other institutionalized standards for some people. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so, like, if we're going to give the guru that authority, or we're going to try to approach the spiritual master for more customized instructions, heads up, you might end up in a more difficult situation than if you just said, okay, I'm going to follow the society standards. All that to say that regardless of what happens, and if you are successful in getting, again, more customized, personalized instructions from the spiritual master, that is no guarantee that you will be successful in executing those instructions either. And so in that case, we have to have a strategy, a thoughtful, helpful strategy for responding to the situation that we are inevitably going to find ourselves in, which is being unable to maintain certain standards, or finding ourselves, spiritually lacking in one way or another. And I think that is worth examining, and that is worth kind of providing more guidance around. And so, like what Madhva Prabhu is saying, is I think has a lot of those elements. It's the response to finding yourself unsuccessful, I think, should be to go more deeply and more intently towards the sources of our upliftment, the devotees, the devotional activities, the spiritual master, as opposed to causing us to retreat, which is obviously a problem.
Beautiful.
Jai.
I don't think you left anything else for anyone else to say. That's unfair.
Jai, there is, Jai. I know you're gonna close this out. You're gonna close this out.
How can I close it out? He took all the juicy points with his brilliance.
Well, I was gonna know. You're still gonna find something, but I was gonna ask if I could just quickly touch on something before I know you're gonna close it out. I think you're gonna close it out. Yeah. No, is that the idea?
Please. I don't have to be the one that
just something quick because anyway, it's just something that it touched. Abhay, you basically raised the point. Not Abhay, sorry. Karuna, you were saying something that really touched on my point, I felt, and it's something that I think is so important. And Abhay, you were talking about it now as well. It's essentially this idea of having a healthy community where we can be honest. So I was talking about being honest with your guru. But how can you be honest with your guru first if you can't be honest with your friends? If our society is so narrow-minded that we can't accept each other for our honest selves, then how are we going to feel secure to speak to our gurus? And it's so important that we create a healthy community of real people, not just devotees, of real people. We're humans, And I think our society lacks that a little bit. That's why there's societal fear. There's societal fear that I can't tell people what I'm doing. That's why people drop away. They're like, I can't hang out with these people because I'm good enough to hang out with these people anymore. Even I have that fear to some extent. And you may not be overt about how fallen you feel to be, but it would be good for us to be able to be overt about where we're at with our friends and relatives. And that's a culture shift that I think we all need to make. And it comes from this little thing. I was thinking bad association. What bad association? Because we get told, don't do asat sangha. That's bad association. Only hang out with people who are Krishna conscious. So, that to me can be a dangerous one because it might make you feel, I've even heard devotees say, I don't hang out with that devotee because they're bad association. And it's like, it's a double-edged sword, because what about if that devotee wants to become Krishna conscious and just needs good association? They're screwed. So, what does bad association mean? That's another thing. What does bad association mean? Because sometimes I'm bad association, but I really want to become good association and I need good association, So we need to move away a little bit from, like, if someone's not chanting their 16 rounds and they have sex with their wife, they're bad association. Don't hang out with them. Because that's unhealthy expectation, and it creates an unhealthy, kind of narrow-minded neophyte society, which it's not how it is, but it can be like that. And it's something that I feel so fortunate to be able to just be this honest with you guys. You said we have this Bhagavatam Sangha, so we come together and we do the most freaking awesome thing in the world, but we do it in a safe environment, and it's so uplifting, and you can just be yourself and be honest, and it's really really amazing and refreshing. And it's I feel so fortunate to be able to be this honest with a wonderful group of people, but it lacks a little bit on a societal level, and it's something that we can all think about.
Thank you for plugging our Men's Bhagavatam Sangha. We meet every Sunday at 9 a.m. in the morning. You can hit me up with a message if you're a cisgender male only, and we can add you to the group. You guys have already covered everything. I don't really think I have anything to add. I can only maybe amplify. I think one of the first points I would amplify is Abai's point, just our response to reversals in life, because a lot of the Bhagavatam even itself, or Shastra in general, is teaching us how to respond with reversals in life. I wouldn't even say particularly the Bhagavatam, which is, I remember when I first read the Bhagavatam, I was like, how come all of Krishna's devotees are like, yo, what's going on here? I thought if I became a devotee, it was going to be bliss land, but I'm like, every chapter, I'm like, they're going through some shit right now. This is crazy. And then we kind of hear the devotional response to reversals in life as a general principle. So kind of emphasizing that when we're trying to encourage one another or giving guidance to someone and so on, more emphasis on the response to setbacks, including not being able to follow your vows, for example, would be very important. I always have this little aphorism that I like to say, that you can either be humble or you can be humbled. Two choices. And a lot of us don't, maybe in our human conditioning, conditioned by hubris, as many of us may tend to be, we don't have the innate ability to just be humble. So Maya's like, I got this one. And then when we're put into a humbled position, at least from the study of Shastra, the nature of being humbled is that it causes you to reach upward toward that which can uplift you. Whereas when you're just in like a butthurt situation where you have this ego thing going on, where you were accomplished, whether it was accomplishment in your vows, you were solid, accomplishment in going to Mongol. Sidebar, my first year as a brahmachari, I didn't miss, not my first 2 years, I never missed a Mongol Arti. And I was so proud of that. Like I never missed Mongol Arti. I was like usually the first one up in the ashram. After 2 years, I'll never forget, after 2 years, I got super sick. I swam from the cold showers and I couldn't get up from Mongol Arti. And when I got up the next day, because I was sick, I was lying down the whole day. When I got up the next day, devotees came and was like, so, Prabhu, you missed the Mongol Arti. And they were just like rubbing it in my face so harsh. Like, even though I never said anything about going to Mongol Arti, but I clearly was emanating some sort of hubris about it. And so when I missed literally everyone in the ashram, they were like, so Prabhu, nice to see you. You missed the Mongol Arti the other day.
No one said, hey, bro, you want some vitamin C or something? They were like, hey,
they wanted to point that out. You missed the Mongol Arti, I remember like feeling that sort of crushed ego experience. And usually the nature of the ego when it's crushed is just to retaliate. And I feel like a lot of times when we have this sort of retaliation response to reversals in life, instead of just like being humbled by it and reaching upward because we've been pushed down, the tendency is just to retaliate. And part of retaliation may be to feel demoralized or jaded or resentful, et cetera, because of the standards that were imposed upon me when I was immature and they weren't customized for me. And this sort of like retaliation spirit comes up because you're butthurt because your ego got smashed. Instead of just being like, wow, I've been humbled. Now I really see what I have to do to improve myself. So a lot of just amplification of that idea there. And also just the amplification of the idea of community and like a more personalized relationship. I think the nature of institutions in general is, I think as in principle, is to depersonalize relationships. It's just the nature of the beast. Like everything has its dharma. So the dharma of an institution has a strong, it can have and usually has a strong element of depersonalization. And so with the individual need for acceptance and a sort of system that is almost by nature impersonal, then you're going to find yourself extremely frustrated. And so I think with COVID situation has, at least what I'm observing about the COVID situation, sidebar, they're talking about stopping international travel unless you get a vaccine. I've seen articles about that recently and so on, which means if that's really true, I'm stuck in America. And if these sort of stipulations start to increase more and more, it appears to me that our vision of Christian consciousness in terms of the institution will be reduced to a vision of Christian consciousness in terms of our communities. And so that need for acceptance will be easily accommodated when our vision of community is not actually an institutional one, but rather a communal one. Like, you know, I know that like growing up in the ashram as a you know, monastic for some time, if you didn't like your temple, you just went to some other temple in some other part of the world. But if that starts to become reduced, then you have to satisfy your need for acceptance within a communal experience. And my general experience after so many years is that usually the people that you need are around you. That's my general life experience. But you just haven't like discovered them yet for whatever reasons, because you have your own ideas of what you need. Just like even doing this men's Bhagavatam Sangha, I wouldn't, if you were to ask me a year ago, like-minded Sangha, I'm like, where is it? There is no like-minded Sangha. I'm all alone in the world. You know, there are only one or two here and there. But after starting this online group, I realized like, wow, there are a lot of like-minded persons like all over the place. And so that need for acceptance can be easily accommodated, or let's say discovered within your community now that that need has been retracted from the institutional sort of looking for acceptance from an institution. That's kind of another idea that I heard from you all. Yeah, and then within that context, just having a deeper relationship with our guides, our mentors, whatever you want to call them, guru, mentor, and so on. I always have a very romantic experience, not thinking about this. Like when you hear, especially Sri Vaishnava stories, like when they were surrendering to their guru, their stories are like so freaking epic. They were like, went to the guru, can you teach me? The guru was like, walk all the way across, you know, the country to this mountain, at the top of the mountain, deliver this thing, and then maybe I'll think about teaching you the tattva. And it's just like, you know, if you try to tell that to someone today, it's just like, whatever, dude, I'm going on Google or Amazon to buy books. But you have like these epic sort of stories of how people actually really had to demonstrate their level of commitment to the teacher. The teacher, in a sense, also had to demonstrate his own method. You would live with the teacher for some time and observe him also as he was observing you. And in this way, you get a sense that the relationship was quite intimate if you really wanted to engage in a sort of relationship. And I think modern technology and advances in the world tends to kind of take away from the necessity of building stronger relations like that. And not only because of technology and the way things are, I just think that's a huge contributing factor. And I think I'm wondering if the sort of COVID situation and the need to kind of like settle down and like really go inside, not only inside your own heart, but inside your own community, is going to lead to more people just discovering for themselves a deeper relationship, not only with their friends, but with persons who would actually be their guides for further progress. And in that way, it becomes easier to not only get a customizable version of practices for you, but it also becomes easier to get the support you need to have the healthy response to reversals in life when they inevitably come up. So this is kind of my summary of all that I heard from all of you. I didn't say anything new. I was just amplifying all the points that I stole from the conversation. I was taking notes. All right. I think
village life is always the answer. It's the answer to all questions, to all of our struggles. Just like find your village and just, you know, that's where it's at. I just want to quickly acknowledge 2 comments here. Rob Elling says, would you agree and perhaps speak about that everything is driven by our shared values? And I think I can answer on behalf of all of us that that is absolutely the case. Values determine that, it's really what directs us. And then Balaram said, some guidance on when to take initiation would be useful. In my case, I took initiation when I was chilling in Mayapur. Of course, I could chant 16 rounds then. Now, working in the city, it can be so much more difficult. Just some reflections. So yeah, people's context. And Balaram, I think what really plays into that is, if you're working in the city and you don't have association, that's a hellish condition. It's fundamentally unsustainable to try and practice like,
Wow,
it's
Karuna, straight for the
no,
jugular.
bro, I can say that because that's exactly the situation that I'm in right now. So I can say that because I know, if you don't have the sangha, then it's like, sadhana bhakti, bro, it's gonna drag. It's really not gonna be easy. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Now, my dear friends, I want to actually just share something. It's my favorite extract, one of my favorite extracts out of one of my favorite books called Aesthetic Vedanta. And I think it just really, really ties everything up so nicely. I have shared this before. Some of you may be familiar, but yeah, it's nice.
All right, give it to us.
Okay. Tripurari Maharaj Ki Jai. Passionate love of Krishna is truth that is beautiful and bewildering. To embark upon it requires only that we cherish as our ideal the depths of the ocean of love of Krishna. This is so because it is a person's ideal that he will become. And it is the generous opinion of Sri Chaitanya that we should judge a person not by his past, nor even by the limits of his present. We should judge him by his ideal, for that he will become. We may not be prepared to adopt the aforementioned lifestyle, which constitutes the formal path of passionate love, i.e., rules and regulations. Yet, if we are attracted to the ideal, we have come a long way toward realizing the truth that is beautiful. Merely cherishing this ideal amounts to a powerful spiritual practice. Sri Jiva Goswami has written in his Bhakti Sandarbha, there is not even any real need for great effort in spiritual practice. For if one simply believes with all sincerity that he is the servant of Krishna, that sense of spiritual identification will itself eventually give him all perfection. Thakur Bhaktivinoda also offers encouraging words in his Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita. He tells us that the mere temptation to pursue the ideal of the Vraj Gopis has such a spiritually powerful effect that it minimizes the effectiveness of adherence to ritualistic bhakti, what to speak of any other process. And then finally, as leaves fall naturally from the tree when the season changes from summer to fall, so that which impedes us from practicing the path of passionate love at present will fall away in due course. In our material lives, we inevitably become disenchanted with that for which we have striven. If that disenchantment is met with the inner ideal of passionate love of Krishna, one day we will roam the cow pastures and forests along the banks of the Yamuna, answering the clarion call of Krishna's sweet flute.
There you go. That is a very beautiful, beautiful passage. Thank you for sharing it again with us and the group at large. Thank you so much, Madhua Abai, for joining us. As always, a great, great pleasure. Abai, so articulate and learned and charming. And Madhua, so real and so human. It was really great having you guys on, and I'm super, super ecstatic about this episode. And
so happy to come. Thank you.
More and more in the future.
Enjoy.
Hariom Tat Sat.
Right.
And thank you. Please, if you're not already, sign up for or click the like button on the Bodhika Facebook page. You can get updates on all the sort of Bhakti creatives that are going on there. Our podcast, Arise, the Honest Man podcast, is now on several podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, a few other ones. So we're working on that. So if you want to check it out there, please do that. And Hariom Tat Sat, thanks a lot.
And Satsanga on Instagram also.
Yes, we gotta put those
Yeah.
things in the description box bottom. Check it out on Instagram, SSAT. We're there, especially if you're a guy and you're looking. That inspiration for this podcast is that particular group, a sangha of men discussing human issues that embattle men in the modern world. So if you're down and interested in that, please give us a ping there on Instagram also. Thank you all so much to our listeners, and thank you, Abai, Madhua, Krumina. Hari.
Thank you.
Big love. Haribo.